Number 10. Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, commonly referred to as the Blood Countess, occupies a pretty creepy place in history as a Hungarian noblewoman with a notorious reputation. She is believed to be one of the most prolific female serial killers in history, earning her eerie nickname from the gruesome practice of bathing in the red of her victims. This ritual was apparently rooted in her belief that it could preserve her youthfulness, and it sounds like some pretty extreme anti-aging to me. Operating during the late 16th and early 17th centuries within the walls of her castle, now located in modern-day Slovakia, Bathory subjected an estimated 650 girls to unimaginable horrors. Her reign of terror reached its thankful end on December 30th, 1610, when Elizabeth, along with 4 accomplices, faced arrest following an investigation into the disturbing rumors surrounding her actions. Despite the severity of the accusations, though, a lack of concrete evidence prevented the claims from being substantiated. However, the absence of solid proof did not grant her leniency, and she was confined to her castle until her eventual passing. Her evil deeds and the whole blood-soaked castle deal make her a heavyweight in the true crime scene. It's a legitimate horror story with more questions than answers. Would probably make a great horror film, though. And in at number 9 today is Ma Barker. Ma Barker, a notorious figure in US criminal history, served as the leader of the feared Barker gang, which her sons were also a part of. Gaining the title of the FBI's public enemy #1, Barker orchestrated a series of robberies, murders, and kidnappings across the American Midwest in the early 1930s. Her life came to a pretty explosive end in 1935 during a prolonged standoff in her Florida hideout, setting a record as the longest standoff in FBI history. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's first director, once described her as the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the last decade. Hoover's description added to Ma Barker's mysterious reputation, solidifying her reputation as one of the most evil women of all time. Number 8. Belle Gunnis. Belle Gunnis holds the disturbing title of one of America's worst female serial killers. Even before considering her terrifying actions, she was already an imposing and physically intimidating woman, standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds. It was alleged that she was responsible for the passing of her husbands, younglings, numerous suitors, boyfriends, and even her own daughters, Myrtle and Lucy. Belle's motive was pretty simple: greed. She gained income by stealing life insurance and assets from her victims. Reports suggest her victim count exceeds 20, with some claiming it could be over 100. Inconsistencies in her post-mortem examination, such as the reported height being 2 inches shorter than Belle's 6 feet, contributed to her becoming a figure in American criminal folklore, often compared to a female Bluebeard, because people will make things up and just run with it sometimes. Number 7. Griselda Blanco. Born in 1943, Griselda Blanco, known by her aliases of La Madrina or the Black Widow, emerged as a frightening figure in the criminal underworld. Hailing from Colombia, she etched her name in history as one of the most ruthless and feared queenpins ever known. Blanco's notoriety reached its peak as a key player in the notorious Medellin cartel, a criminal empire synonymous with violence and illicit trade. What sets Blanco apart is her unexpected role as a mentor to none other than Pablo Escobar. However, as fate would have it, their relationship eventually soured, paving the way for a rivalry that would echo through criminal history. Blanco's criminal empire revolved around the transportation of a certain illegal powdery substance from the fields of Colombia to the streets of the United States. This calculated operation, coupled with her alleged involvement in up to 200 people being ushered to the pearly gates, showcased Blanco's audacity and cunning in a male-dominated realm. Her ability to not only navigate but dominate such a perilous environment proved her prowess as a criminal mastermind. Following a stint behind bars, Blanco's life met a chilling end on September 3rd, 2012, when she was wiped out in a hail of lead, leaving a void in the criminal landscape she once ruled. I'm all for girl power, but let's just put that energy somewhere else, shall we? Cool. Number 6. Christiana Edmonds. Christiana Edmonds, also known as the Chocolate Cream Killer, was an English woman with a really disturbing hobby. She would purchase chocolates, lace them with strychnine, a powerful and toxic chemical, and then return them to the shop. Unexpected customers who bought those chocolates would naturally fall ill. In 1871, a tragic incident occurred when a young person passed away after consuming one of the poisoned chocolates. Now, following this, Edmonds escalated her campaign by sending parcels of her dangerous chocolates to notable individuals. As the police began linking the fatal and damaging outcomes to the chocolates, Edmonds attempted to deflect suspicion by sending parcels to herself in order to mislead the police. How intelligent. Once she was caught, Edmonds was initially sentenced to death, but her punishment was later changed to life imprisonment due to her mental illness.
Famous evil number 5 is Hell's Bells. Belle Gunnis was one of America's most productive female killers. Homegirl was 6 foot tall and weighing in at over 200 pounds. She could have been out here competing in Olympic shot put, but she used her brutal strength for different uses. Insurance fraud. She is first married to a candy shop owner, and when the times get tough, she and her husband burn both the shop and their home for quickie insurance payouts. Then her husband dies suddenly from a brain hemorrhage, and Belle cashes in. The second husband, married in 1901, doesn't even survive a year. Apparently, a meat grinder fell on his head on accident, which worked out perfectly for Belle's dwindling coin pouch. Yet nothing nefarious is proven until after her alleged death. See, Belle's house burns one night in 1908. Inside, the body of the single mother is found alongside that of her offspring. Devastating stuff. But what kind of threw a pin in that was the dismembered feet, hands, and head found in the pig pen, and then the bones all found in the yard. And the buckets of shattered bone dumped in ditches. All told, the remains of more than 40 people of varying age are exhumed. Suitors, boyfriends, suspicious people, etc. Now here comes some mystery for you. Belle's charred corpse doesn't match up with Belle herself. The skeleton was 2 inches shorter than it was supposed to be, and also it's missing its head. Kinda important for identification, don't you think? The man arrested for the arson and deaths, Ray Lamphere, who was also once her accomplice, stated Belle had set up the whole thing as a getaway scheme and skipped town. Famous evil number 4 is the Beast of Belen. This SS guard was named Irma Gries, and she is one of the worst of the worst. Coming from a poor rural family, she watched her mother die by drinking acid when she learned of her husband's affair. Now left alone with said father, whom she now hated, Irma heard of the BDM, the girls' equivalent of the Yahtzee Boy Scouts, and begged to join. He forbade it, so she waited his ass out till she was 18 and could simply volunteer for guard work. She starts at Ravensbrück and then is transferred to the Big A. Irma had been dealt a bad hand by having such a violent father, and it seemingly rubbed off on her behavior, which isn't an excuse at all. She was cruel, wicked, and patrolled with a whip so she could flog anyone at any time she felt. Apart from being a complete sadist, attacking prisoners and killing them, she was also alleged to have forced intercourse on others, or upon threat of death, make them do it with each other. Yet she's that kind of evil, and it promoted her to the highest rank a lady could get in the SS, senior supervisor. The worst fact written about this woman was she was one of the many party members to request home items, lampshades specifically, be made out of prisoner's skin for her. She owned 3. After the war, she was sentenced to death at the Nuremberg tribunals. Captain Eric Brown, assigned to interrogate some of these people, said that Gries among them was the worst human being I have ever met. Famous evil number 3 is Vampire of Barcelona. So, Andita Marti would have been seen shambling the streets of Barcelona, dressed in rags and smeared with dirt. Don't be fooled, as this was a ruse used to befriend and lure in the hungry off the streets to vanish into the shadows forever. Later on in the day, she returns home to a comfortable house, sheds her costume, dressing like a woman of respectable means and an alls woman. But when night returned, she's a figure of decadence and luxury, visiting casinos to find new clientele to visit her establishment, a brothel that served a certain type of illegal appetite. See, those she stole from the street were forced into her business, and when death came a knocking on their bruised and broken minds and bodies, she would reduce, reuse, recycle, turning her victims into potions and concoctions. See, this horrific woman also pretended to be a witch doctor. She thought the blood, skin, and bones of useful or beautiful people could cure things like tuberculosis, or even go as far as to stop aging or make someone immortal. Then in 1909, the police come up banging on the door following an investigation, and she's arrested for running a brothel, but thanks to her powerful collections, she's off the hook. A few years later, though, she once again is approached by police, and using accusations of keeping chickens in her apartment as an excuse to gain entry, police find 2 people reported missing. Subsequent searches also reveal a sack containing bloody clothes and knives, then another container of 30 small pieces of human bone. After that, they gained access to a locked room and find pitchers and jars containing human remains, along with already prepared medicines ready for sale. And then behind a false wall in that room and in the ceiling, and buried in the gardens, they find the skulls and bones. She was taken into custody but died before reaching trial. Famous evil number 2 is the Bandit Queen. Sometimes when evil is given context, it's not so evil after all. Pretty much no woman on this list received that grace except for Foulon Davy. Born in 1963, Foulon was married off young, and her older husband violated and beat her regularly. She would run away only to be forcefully returned to him until he kicked her from his home for not fulfilling wifely duties, and she's exiled from her own village. In 79, she catches a charge for stealing, and and her time in jail is also filled with bodily violation and beatings. She began to hate men who harmed women and waited in resentment for her moment to strike. Ironically, it's after her freedom from jail when she's suddenly taken captive by a crime syndicate. One member, Vikram, spares her from being violated by the members and kills the group's leader to ensure her safety. Homegirl falls head over heels right then and there. She joins the group and married Vikram. One night they even hit up her old village so she could publicly slay her old husband in the center of town as a warning. Fulan became an integral member of this group. After every successful crime, she would visit the temples nearby and thank the goddess Durga for protection. However, when two previous members return and find Vikram killed the leader, they kill him, and Fulan escapes with her life, only to once again be jailed, violated, and beaten. When the villagers help her escape, she starts her own crime syndicate, and every crime committed, she funnels money back into poor communities and families. By then, she'd earned the nickname Bandit Queen. 17 months on, 14th of February 1981, she returned to where Vikram had been killed, ready for revenge. Fulan marched into the village dressed as a police officer, and when she failed to find all the men that she was looking for, she ordered her gang to just line up all the upper caste men in one line and let the ammunition fly. She continued on the warpath for 2 more years until February of 1983 she agreed to surrender to the government under specific conditions. She would only surrender to the Madhya Pradesh police, not UP police. She would lay down her arms only before Durga and the Mahatma Gandhi's pictures. She needed affirmation she wouldn't get the death penalty and that the sentence of the other members of the syndicate wouldn't exceed 8 years, and she also demanded a plot of land for reconciliation and her entire family be escorted by police to the surrender ceremony. The police agreed to everything, and she surrendered and was charged with 48 crimes. Her trial was delayed for 11 years, which she served in prison, and she was finally released on parole in 1994. She actually later joined politics, representing political parties, until she is killed, sadly, outside of her own home in July of 2001 as revenge for the 21 men she killed in the Ben Mai incident. Our last famous evil is the soap maker of Correggio. Born in Montella, Italy in 1894, Leonardo actually did have the tragic life she claimed. She attempted to take her life multiple times in her youth before marrying Raffaele Pansarari against her mother's will, earning her the boot from the family home. So she gets her own home, which is destroyed in 1930 in a Penia earthquake. She lost 17 children before, during, and after this event, which really kicked off a slow and steady mental health decline. When her eldest son chose to leave for the Italian military, she began to truly believe she was cursed. So she did what all potentially cursed people do, hit up a psychic, who tells Leonardo that in her right hand is a prison and in her left is a criminal asylum. Somehow, this created a logic jump that someone was going to do something to her son and earn a place in one of those 2 buildings. So her superstitions only deepened with time. Becoming dangerously paranoid, she started to believe human sacrifice was the only way to protect her son. Her first victim was a local woman named Faustina, who she invited to her home under some guise. She then gave her a bunch of wine mixed with a bunch of toxins and then killed her with an axe, and the same one she uses to cut her body into pieces. She collected her blood in a basin, dried it, ground it, mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, eggs, kneaded into dough, and baked it. To quote her, "I made lots of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came to visit." Recipe must have popped off because she killed the next 2 victims the same way and produced more tea cookies. And while she was at it, she used the flesh, a bottle of cologne, and a pot of boiling water to produce what she called some of the most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to the neighbors and acquaintances. Leonardo's mistake was that she thought she had done it all perfectly and she couldn't get caught. But somehow police came to know about her. At first she defended herself, but when the police shifted the blame towards her beloved son, she admitted to everything.
Number 10, Myra Hindley. The influence people have in wanting to be accepted by their surroundings is pretty high, especially if they are lonely or more subservient to doing whatever someone asks them to do. In the case of Myra, she's like a few on this list is part of that group. Myra Hindley was a notorious English criminal who, along with her partner Ian Brady, was involved in the Moors death in 1960s. Both of their victims were young people and teenagers, and the crimes became known as the Moors deaths because some of the victims' bodies were buried on the Saddleworth Moor near Manchester. The ages of the victims ranged from 10 to 17 years old, and Myra Hindley and Ian Brady were arrested on October 1965. At their trial in 1966, they were convicted of multiple killings. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment. Hindley was also convicted of harboring Brady's knowledge of John Kilbride's deaths, and Myra Hindley spent over 36 years in prison. During her incarceration, she underwent various legal proceedings and appeals, and she consistently maintained that she was a reformed person and sought parole on multiple occasions. In the end, Myra died in prison on November 15, 2002 at the age of 60. Number 9, Carla Homa. In the 1990s, a Canadian woman who gained notoriety for her involvement in a series of horrific crimes committed alongside her former husband. Homolka's first victim was her own younger sister, Tammy. Just 2 days before Christmas, Tammy Homolka was drugged and harmed by her older sister Anne Bernardo and died after choking on her own vomit. The couple then proceeded to kidnap both Leslie Mahaffey and Christian French before both were horrifically mistreated before they were killed and after Homolka was arrested. She conned the investigators and tricked them into believing that Bernardo was primarily responsible, and she testified against him and was given a very lenient sentence in return, though the videotapes later revealed the extent of the atrocities in which she also participated in. Homolka was released from prison in 2005, and Homolka today lives in a completely different life. She settled comfortably in Quebec, where she is part of a quiet community and even volunteers at a local elementary school. Number 8, Rosemary West. Part of the serial killing couple from the Gloucestershire area of England, Rose and Fred West killed at least 9 young women together throughout the 70s and 80s. After tormenting these people, the West would then kill their victims and bury their remains in a yard and their basement. As a result, their house would later become known as the House of Horrors. Rose West also acted independently and killed her own stepdaughter through Fred. In June of 1971, West was then convicted of 10 homicides in 1995 as well as in 2022, remains in prison. Fred West then also took his own life shortly after being arrested. Number 7, Amelia Dyer. Proving one of the Victorian era's most infamous criminals, Amelia Dyer could be one of the most prolific serial killers in human history. Back in Victorian England, people were paid for adopting babies in a practice known as baby farming. Amelia Dyer would then turn this into her profession and adopted numerous young people. She began by keeping them for a time until they passed of natural causes, but ultimately turned to disposing them shortly after adopting them, thereby keeping the money without having to actually raise them. One of Dyer's victims was found floating in the River Thames on March 30th, 1896, leading to her arrest and eventually execution. While the 6 victims may have been confirmed, it's believed that Dyer may have actually killed up to 400 throughout her life. In one of the most sensational trials of the Victorian period, she was found guilty and later hung. Number 6, Isabella the First. Although they were noted as the Queen Regent of Castile and United Spain, the atrocities they had inflicted onto the world has been noted as an expansion at the hands of so many deaths. Isabella and Fernandad issued the Alhambra Decree in 1492, which resulted in the expulsions of Jews from Spain. This policy, driven by the religious and political motives, has been criticized for its impact on a significant population. She also supported the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in 1478, while initially intending to ensure the orthodoxy of converts from Judaism and Islam. It later expanded its scope. The Inquisition was responsible for the persecution, torment, and execution of individuals accused of heresy. As well as her support for Columbus, as we know, led the discovery and eradication of the indigenous of America. Her desire and need of expansion through led to the world where it is today, left a blood trail of civilizations that were already established before they even got their colonial hands on. Number 5, Mary Catherine Heron, also known as Big Nose Kate, was a historical figure associated with the American Old West, as she was a Hungarian-born adult worker and companion to the legendary lawman and gambler Doc Holliday. Kate eventually moved to West and found herself in a rough and often lawless mining towns of the Old West, as she worked as the Lady of the Night, gained notoriety for her feisty and independent personality. Kate then became romantically involved with John Henry Doc Holliday, a dentist turned gambler and gunfighter. What a career change. They met in Fort Griffin, Texas in 1870s following Doc Holliday's death in 1887. Kate Heron then lived in various places, including Arizona and Colorado. She then worked as a nurse and a hotel owner in the early 1900s, and Kate moved to Arizona and lived in poverty. She worked in various jobs, including serving as a cook, and then in the 1930s she applied and received a pension for being a widow of a veteran American Indian War. Doc Holliday had happened to serve as a scout. Big Nose Kate then passed away on November 2nd, 1940 in Arizona at the age of 90. She outlived many of the famous figures of the Old West. Number 4, Belle Starr. Born Myra Mabel Shirley, Belle Starr was a notorious figure associated with the American Wild West during the 19th century. She became known as the Bandit Queen and gained notoriety for her associations with various outlaws and her involvement in criminal activities. Belle married several times, with her famous marriage being the outlaw Cole Younger, a former member of the James Younger gang. After Younger, she then married Sam Starr, a Cherokee outlaw, which contributed to her connection with the Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Belle Starr was also known to associate with herself with various outlaws, including Jesse James, the Younger brothers, and the infamous Dalton gang. Her connections to these outlaws and her involvements in horse theft and other legal activities contributed to her reputation. Belle Starr and her husband Sam Starr lived in the Indian Territory, where they ran a horse ranch, and their ranch became a haven for outlaws seeking refuge from the law. Belle Starr was arrested several times for various offenses, including horse theft. However, she often managed to avoid lengthy imprisonments, and her criminal activities continued. Belle Starr's life came to a violent end when she was shot and killed on February 3rd in 1889 while riding home from a neighbor's house. The circumstances circumstances of her death remains somewhat of a mystery, and the identity of the killer was never actually established. Belle Starr's life exploits became part of the Wild West folklore, and over the years, she had been portrayed in many books, films, and television shows, contributing to her enduring legend. Number 3. Eda Place. Eda Place is one of the mysteries of the American Wild West, as her true identity and details of her life pretty much remains uncertain. She was associated with the famous outlaws Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, as we also know them, and is often considered to have been romantically involved with the Sundance Kid. Despite her connections to these historical figures, she is very little known about Eda, as Eda's place, true identity, and background are unclear. Her real name and place of birth and details about her early life are not actually known at all, and some historical sources suggest that she may have been born in the United States, while others propose that she could have just been European or South American origin. Eda Place is also best known for her association with Butch Cassidy, aka Robert Leroy Parker, and the Sundance Kid, whose actual name is Harry Alonzo Longabo, and she traveled with them during their exploits in South America, where they sought refuge to escape law enforcement in the United States. In the early 20th century, Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kids, and Eda traveled to South America, where they continued a life of crime, and they are believed to have engaged in bank and train robberies in countries like Argentina and Bolivia. The fate of Eda Place is uncertain, as some theories suggest that she may have perished alongside Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in a shootout with the Bolivian authorities. However, there is actually no conclusive evidence to support this theory, as there may be other theories that Eda Place's true identity, with some speculating that she may have used multiple names during her lifetime. However, concrete evidence to confirm her background or provide clarity on her true identity is still undiscovered. Number 2. Born in France around 1829, Eleanor Dumont moved from the United States and became involved with the gambling industry known as the Gold Rush. She arrived in California during the Gold Rush of 1850, seeking opportunities in the burgeoning mining towns in 1854. Eleanor ended up opening a gambling establishment in Nevada City, California, where she ran gambling tables and her reputation for her skills as a card dealer. She then became known as Madame Mustache due to the fact that she had distinctive facial hair and refused to remove it despite societal expectations, and over the years, Madame Mustache opened and managed several gambling establishments in various mining towns, including Virginia City and Bodie. Despite her success in the gambling business, Eleanor faced financial challenges and struggled to maintain her enterprises. She suffered major losses and debts that ended up leading to her to a decline in her fortunes, and then Eleanor Dumont's life took a tragic turn, and as in 1879, facing financial difficulties and heartbreak, she took her own life by ingesting an overdose of really intense drugs in Bodie, California. Eleanor Dumont's story proves that a glimpse into the complexities of life during the Gold Rush and the challenges faced by women trying to make a living in a male-dominated society. Her role as a successful gambler and card dealer, as well as her refusal to conform to traditional gender norms, contribute to her place in the history of the American West. The nickname Madame Mustache and her distinctive facial features further add the colorful and unconventional aspects of her life. And finally, number 1, Bonnie Parker was one half of the notorious criminal duo known as Bonnie and Clyde. Alongside Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker gained notoriety during the Great Depression for a series of bank robberies and criminal activities in the early 1930s. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born on October 1st, 1910 in Rowena, Texas, and she grew up in a working-class family, and despite her small stature, developed a love for poetry and drama. I wonder if that's what caused her to join Clyde, because she joined Clyde Barrow in January 1930. Clyde was already a seasoned criminal, a little bit of spice, a little paprika, was serving time in East End Prison Farm in Texas. A mutual acquaintance smuggled a weapon to Clyde, and he used it to escape. Bonnie and Clyde embarked on a crime spree that included bank robberies, burglaries, and car thefts. They were involved in several pew-pew outs with law enforcement, and their criminal exploits attracted significant media attention. Bonnie and Clyde were often a part of criminal gang that included their other associates, such as the Clyde brothers, Buck Barrow and his wife Blanche Barrow. The gang engaged in violent confrontations with law enforcement, resulting in injuries and fatalities on both sides. Bonnie and Clyde gained additional notoriety due to photographs found by police at one of their hideouts, and the images depicted the couple posing with weapons, contributing to their image of glamorous and dangerous criminals. Bonnie and Clyde crime spree came to a violent end on May 23, 1934, when the law enforcement officers ambushed their car near Bentonville Parish, Louisiana. The officers fired a barrage of bullets, killing both Bonnie and Clyde instantly, and the story of Bonnie and Clyde has become a part of American folklore. Their criminal exploits and romanticized in the media have been a subject of numerous books, films, and songs, and the 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, further cemented their status as infamous figures. It might be too clever to talk about Lizzie Bordon as a pun, but I'll ask you guys about that later. Sorry. Anyways, Lizzie Bordon was an American woman who was tried and then later acquitted for the axe murderers of her father and stepmother in Massachusetts. Lizzie was very religious and would go to church and do church activities, teaching Sunday school, etc., etc. 3 years later, after her mother passed away, her father remarried to Abby Gray. Lizzie didn't like Abby that much because she suspected Abby's goal was her father's money, and as tensions grew even more when Andrew would gift real estate to his new family's wife and their stepmother received a house. The night before the murder, their uncle visited their father to discuss property transfer, which placed more attention. After the crime was committed, the police turned their attention to Lizzie as she gave conflicting testimonies within the day. And after many strange occurrences, like her cleaning her dress and burning it up saying it was covered in paint, the town's suspicion of her drugging her father to sleep in order to whack him with an axe, overall the evidence was unclear and caused many controversial issues. However, the trial was later pushed away when another axe murderer similar to her father and her stepmom's case occurred 5 days prior. Still, the reputation of Lizzie and her sister's involvement was tarnished, and the suspecting evidence and accounts of that day remains unsolved. Number 9. Elsa Coke. Elsa Coke was a German war criminal who committed atrocities while her husband, Karl Otto Coke, was commanded at the Buchenwald in World War II. Because of the egregiousness of her alleged allegations, and her actions included that she had selected tattooed prisoners for death in order to fashionably create lampshades and other items from their skin. These are fake, by the way, they're not real. Her 1947 U.S. military commission court trial at Dachau received worldwide media attention, as did the testimony of survivors who ascribed her sadistic and perverse acts of violence to Coke, giving rise to her image as her concentration camp murderesses. However, authoritative testimony from numerous witnesses at her post-war trials firmly established that she had made extensive use of slave labor at the camp, had assaulted inmates on several occasions, and had reported inmates to the camp SS for beatings. Beatings that resulted in death on at least one occasion. While imprisoned, she experienced delusions and had become convinced that the concentration camp survivors would abuse her in the cell. She then ended up taking her own life in jail while serving time. Number 8. Bel Gunnis. With an estimated 48 deaths at her hand, Bel Gunnis poisoned, bludgeoned, and decapitated her victims, all so that she could collect and line her pockets with savings and insurance policies. This lonely hearts killer was known as Lady Bluebeard, amongst other names, luring her victims with newspaper advertisements. Gunnis then began meeting wealthy men through a lovelorn column. Her suitors were her next victims, each of whom brought cash to her farm and then disappeared forever, including John Moo, Henry Galthart, Olaf, Oli B, Andrew, just to name a few. One of the victims' brothers came suspicious, and Gunnis's luck seems to be running out. Her farmhouse burnt to the ground, and the smoldering ruins workmen discovered 4 skeletons. 3 were identified as her foster young. However, the 4th, believed to be Gunnis, was unexpectedly missing as its skull. After the fire, her victims were unearthed from their shallow graves around the farm. All told, the remains of more than 40 men and minors were exhumed. However, Belle managed to skip out of town before being officially convicted and was never tracked down. Her death has never been confirmed. Number 7. Countess Elizabeth Bathory. I don't know if you've seen the tales of Snow White and how there was this once evil queen who yearned for eternal beauty, but like all fairy tales come from the stem of truth. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman who was an alleged serial killer from the family Bathory, who owned a land in the Kingdom of Hungary. Bathory and 4 of her servants were accused of torturing and killing hundreds of young and old women between 1590 and 1610. During her arrest, it is commonly believed that Bathory was caught in the act of the torture, but the reality was that she was just having dinner. Most of the witnesses testified that she had heard the accusations from others, but did not actually see it themselves. The servants confessed under torture, which is not credible in contemporary proceedings. The accusations of the murder were based on rumors, and as there is no documents to prove that anyone in the area complained about the Countess, in this time period, if someone was harmed, or let's say someone stole something, a letter would be written out as a complaint. Several authors have argued that Elizabeth Bathory was a victim of conspiracy. Similar during the Salem witch trials, many people insisted that they saw the accused witches flying through the sky. Clearly neither thing happened and are possibly a form of mass delusion or self-interest lies. Historians are therefore extremely careful in how they treat eyewitness accounts of this sort, given the possibility for collective and self-reinforcing delusions. Number 6. Dorothea Helen Pente. Dorothea Helen Pente was an American convicted serial killer, and in the 1980s she ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California, and murdered various elderly and mentally disabled boarders before cashing their social security checks. She paid each of them monthly spendies, but then kept the remaining for what she claimed were expenses for the boarding house. Puente's boarding house was visited by several parole agents as a result of previous orders for her to stay away from the elderly people and not to handle government checks. Despite these frequent visits, she was never charged with anything. Neighbors began to grow suspicious of Puente when she stated that she adopted a homeless man named Chief to serve as a handyman. She had Chief dig the basement and remove soil and garbage from the property, and Chief then put in a newly concrete slab in the basement before he too mysteriously disappeared. In November 1988, another tenant in Puente's house, Alvaro Montoya, disappeared, and after he failed to show up for his meetings, his social worker reported him missing. Police arrived at Puente's boarding house and began to search the property. They discovered recently disturbed soil and were able to uncover 7 bodies in the yard. When the investigation began, Puente was not considered a suspect, and as soon as the police let her out of their sight, she basically fled to Los Angeles, where she visited a bar and began to talk to an elderly pensioner. The man recognized her from the news, and then he called the police, and she was charged with 9 counts of murder and was sentenced to 2 years of life. She died at the age of 82 and had always insisted all of her tenants died to natural death.
Number 5. Mary the First of England. Born on February 18, 1516, Mary the First held the throne as Queen of England and Ireland from July 1553 until her passing. As the only surviving child of the marriage between Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, Mary the First's reign is notable for her brutal persecution of Protestants, earning her infamous moniker Bloody Mary. Her attempt to forcefully return England to Catholicism resulted in the forced passing of numerous prominent Protestants, contributing to a climate of fear and leading around 800 Protestants to flee the country, unable to return until her passing. During her reign, Bloody Mary implemented the heresy laws, which resulted in the burning of over 300 Protestants accused of heresy. Despite the widespread violence, Mary I was never prosecuted for her actions. However, after her passing on November 17, 1558, the winds of change swept through England, ushering away from her staunch Catholic policies. The efforts to re-establish Catholicism were ultimately reversed, marking a turning point in the religious landscape of England. Mary I's reign, entwined with religious strife and political turmoil, remains a complex chapter in history where power, ideology, and the consequences of persecution shape the course of a nation. Number 4. Wu Zetian. Between 665 and 690, Wu Zetian controlled China as empress through her husband, and later as empress dowager through her sons. However, in 690, she achieved a historic milestone by becoming empress, marking her as China's first and only official recognized female ruler. Wu Zetian maintained her authoritarian position from 690 until her passing in 705. Now, despite the significant achievements in expanding China's territory and establishing it as a powerful empire, her reign was unfortunately also marked by violence and bloodshed. Wu Zetian's rise to power was marked by a series of manipulative and ruthless tactics. She orchestrated the downfall of her political rivals, resorting to schemes such as false accusations, purges, anything to eliminate potential threats. While her success in building a powerful empire is acknowledged, she has faced enduring criticism for the ruthless tactics employed to do so. Number 3. Mary Ann Cotton. Mary Ann Cotton, who lived in the 1800s, left behind a criminal tale that's not all neatly documented. Back then, record keeping wasn't the greatest, so we're left with a bit of a puzzle when it comes to the exact details of her evil actions. But it's estimated that Cotton might have offed around 21 people. 3 of them were unlucky husbands, and a whopping 11 were her very own family. She had this not-so-friendly habit of using arsenic to bring their lives to an end, and then cashing in on their life insurance policies. The party came to a screeching halt, however, when she attempted this method on her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, leading to her capture and the grand finale, a date with the executioner. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They gave her a short rope instead of the customary long one. This meant that instead of physics causing her neck to snap, she instead suffered a long, slow, agonizing suffocation. Number 2. Mary Piercy. Mary Piercy, born in 1866, lived in Kentish Town, North London, with her lover, Charles Creighton. Feeling unsatisfied with life, at the age of 24, Mary sought more, leading her to become romantically involved with a man named Frank Hogg. However, it seems that Frank was also already spoken for, being already married to his pregnant wife, Phoebe. The dark events unfolded on October 24, 1890, when a policeman discovered the almost severed body of a woman in Crossfield Road, Hampstead, along with a blood-stained pram. Mary's association with the crime drew attention when she displayed hysterical behavior at the mortuary while viewing the body of the deceased woman, later identified as Phoebe Hanelo, Frank Hogg's wife. The next day, the lifeless body of Hogg's daughter was found near Finchley Road, a mile away. This time, the cause was suffocation. As the police became more and more aware of the affair between Frank and Mary, they searched Mary's house and found broken furniture and bloodstains. Mary, seemingly unfazed, played the piano and sang loudly during the search. The police ended up uncovering an axe, 2 knives, bloodstained clothing, and love letters between the illicit couple. Mary's attempts to explain the stains as a result of taking out mice was met with understandable skepticism. The police gathered evidence from neighbors who had witnessed Mary wheeling a pram away from the house on the evening of October 24th and heard screams from her residence. The disturbing truth emerged during the trial at the Old Bailey in December 1890. Mary's defense claimed insanity, but it proved unsuccessful, resulting in her sentencing to be sent to hell. On December 23rd, 1890, at Newgate Prison, Mary Piercy faced execution by hanging, orchestrated by James Barry, just over a decade after her father, Thomas Wheeler, met a similar fate for a similar crime. I guess it kind of runs in the family. Number 1. Delphine LaLaurie. Delphine LaLaurie was a prominent New Orleans socialite who lived during the early 19th century. She's infamously remembered for her role in one of the city's most gruesome and horrifying scandals. Born Mary Delphine McCarty in 1787, LaLaurie married 3 times and became a central figure in New Orleans high society. However, her reputation took a pretty dark turn when her mistreatment of people that she kept forcibly endured came to light. Reports of extreme cruelty and sadistic practices circulated, revealing the disturbing treatment of servants within the LaLaurie mansion. In 1834, a fire at the mansion exposed a hidden chamber where individuals were discovered in appalling conditions, subjected to unimaginable horrors. The shocking revelation sparked public outrage, and Delphine LaLaurie fled the city, leaving behind a legacy of cruelty that continues to haunt the historical narrative of New Orleans.
Number 10 will be the Russian madwoman, always a promising start if mad is in the name. In 18th century Russia, Countess Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova had married a nobleman, but within months he died and left her the wealthiest widow in Moscow. Living in an estate with 800 staff members, 2 sons, and nothing to do, it seems Daria turned to violence to fill the time. She'd punish her staff for every mistake they made, and sometimes they'd even be set up to make these errors intentionally. Then she'd beat them until she got tired of doing it herself and handed it off to another serf to do. After a little bit more of that, her victims would be taken and whipped to death in the stables as she watched. She'd throw logs at the girls because she disapproved of their work, and other victims were stripped nude and tossed out into the Russian winter. Women were pushed from windows, and one was forced to stand neck deep in a pond until she froze to death. She even tormented her victims by pouring boiling water on them. In the summer of 1762, letters by a male serf about the violence and death taking place at Daria's estate reached the Empress Catherine II, who was a normal person and thought nobility wasn't above the law. So she ordered the College of Justice to investigate. Daria was soon arrested and in 1762 was held for 6 years while authorities conducted a long-winded investigation. Many victims were too fearful of retaliation to give evidence against the Countess, and the Countess herself showed no remorse and nobody could make her confess. In the end, it was found she killed a total of 139 people but was only charged with 38 deaths since it was all they could prove. Famous evil number 9 is Britain's first serial. The fact that it was a woman? Girl boss moment. Anyways, her name was Mary Ann Cotton, born in 1832. She married at the age of 20 and resettled in Plymouth with her new hubby to start their happily ever after. However, it seems tragedy followed the couple. They have 5 children, yet 4 die of supposed gastric fever and stomach pains. Then her husband dies very suddenly, and Mary relocates to the Northeast. She marries her second husband, who also dies within months. Then Mary moves again and starts seeing widower James Robinson, whom her mother disapproves of, and wouldn't you know it, Mary's mom shows up mysteriously dead in 1866. Robinson had 4 adult children, the same that she used to, from his late wife, and then 2 of which suddenly die soon after they meet Mary. She walks out on him after birthing their daughter, and he's the only husband to survive her. In 1870, Mary married another widower, Frederick Cotton. Soon, Frederick's sister, 2 sons from his previous marriage, and a number of friends died from sudden illness. Frederick himself died in 1871, as did the son he had with Mary, who then quickly remarried. And again, her new husband died after a short illness. When her ex-stepson, Charles Cotton, died suddenly after seeing her in 1872, the press caught wind of a pattern here. Charles Cotton's remains were exhumed, and lo and behold, arsenic is found in the deceased's stomach. Mary was charged with the deaths of 8 of her own offspring, 7 step-ones, her mother, 3 husbands, and a lover, and an inconvenient friend. Her death sentence, however, was botched, and instead of the rope breaking her neck, Mary choked to death for 6 minutes in front of a massive audience. Famous evil number 8 is the serial sisters, Raya and Sakina, the first women to receive the death sentence under the modern Egyptian judicial system. Before they left their village in Tanta for Alexandria, the sisters worked as working girls. Once they moved to Alexandria, though, they started killing, but not out of hatred, just for financial gain. Newsline Mag said it best. The sisters Raya and Sakina Ali Hammam ran several brothels in Alexandria during and after World War I. In 1919 and 1920, they allegedly killed 17 women and stole their gold jewelry, clothes, and money before dismembering and burying them in their own homes. At the time, wealthy women in Egypt didn't put money in banks, preferring to solidify their wealth in the gold jewelry they wore. Stacked bangles, necklaces, ears pierced all the way up to the cartilage, the whole 9 yards. The victims were working girls who used to work in the secret home that was managed by the sisters, or occasionally wealthy market-going women met in town. Most of the victims knew them personally, and he'd even been friends with them for years, and it's this false sense of security that was used to lure the women into one of the 4 homes owned by the sisters, where they'd be plowed full of liquor and substance until a group of men would jump the victim, holding her down and suffocate her with a wet rag. That way they could strip her of her belongings, then bury her beneath the floor tiles. What gets them caught is a dismembered, decaying body found in a ditch nearby, and an arm that washed into a man's plumbing nearby. A police officer already suspicious of the sisters made a report that someone should check their home, and inadvertently saves who knows how many more lives. Following a popularized trial, Rhea and Sakini and their husbands were sentenced to death. Famous evil number 7 is the Servant of God, otherwise known as Isabella of Castile. She and her husband Ferdinand of Aragon ruled over Spain and brought nothing but pain. Huh? Like that one? Anyways, Isabella and Ferdinand are known for completing the Reconquista, which, if you haven't seen our recent video, Top 10 Scary Women from Medieval Times That'll Give You Nightmares, involved the forced conversion or exile of all Muslim and Jewish subjects, called the Alhambra Decree of 1492. Roughly 200,000 people left Spain against their own volition. Those remaining chose conversion and were subsequently persecuted by the Inquisition, investigating Judaizing conversos, aka most of them ended up being tormented to death anyways. Oh, what else was there? I feel like I'm missing something. Oh yeah, Isabella financed Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492, leading to the discovery of the New World and the death of 250 million indigenous people in North America. Then, those who didn't die were captured, put into forced labor until there was only about 10,000 left, and now running out and needing more forced laborers, Chris and the homies started stealing people from Africa. So yeah, this B word is the reason all that crap could even go down, yet here comes Pope Paul in 1974, opening her cause to beatification, aka the path to being made an effing saint in the Catholic Church. She was also granted the title of Servant of God in the same year for her exceptional job at contributing to the destruction of multiple continents. But hey, Elena Ceausescu earned it. Elena was a megalomaniac B-word. She grew up being a failure, even called a repetente in school, somebody who was too mediocre to move up to the next grade. She met her husband, Nicolae, at a Romanian communist meeting in their 20s, and the nobodies, ironically, were to become Stalinist stars in the country. Nicolae ascended to the general secretary position of the party in 1965 and filled the role with extreme nationalism and monarchical tones. They exaggerated his propaganda, but straight up fudged hers. Elena was made out to be a genius, an innovative scientist with published novels and journals and awards, yet she was an ignorant, backward woman who didn't even know the chemical formulas for water and carbon dioxide. Then, on a visit to the People's Republic of China, she meets and is encouraged by Chairman Mao's wife to take more power. So she does. Elena tramples her husband. In recorded speeches, you can see him double check his every word with her, and she forces him to assign her high-ranking government positions, earning her the nickname Viper from party members. By 1989, Elena was practically running the country through her puppet husband. That same year, at Nicolae's final speech, Elena screams at her own booing subjects to shut up and that she will have them all killed. Well, protesters swarm the party headquarters while Elena and her husband try to escape. They're captured and given a makeshift trial that ends with a death sentence. As they were both tied up and marched over to the wall, Elena could be heard screaming at the soldiers, "Shame on you, shame on you. I raised you like a mother. Why are you doing this?" Elena's final angry words to those fulfilling her sentence were, "You motherfuckers," and she died a foul-mouthed tyrant.
Number 5, Dagmar Overby. Dagmar Overby was a Danish serial killer who killed, including one of her own, during a 7-year period between 1913 to 1920. Overby was working as a professional caretaker, caring for babies born outside of marriage. Out of all the minors she killed, some were strangled, some were drowned, and the rest buried to death in her Mansory heater. The exact number of Overby's victims remain unclear, but it is believed that she may have been responsible for the deaths of at least 25. In March 1921, Overby was sentenced to death in one of the most watched death trials in Danish history. The sentence was later commuted to life in jail, and Overby died in prison in 1929, age 42. Number 4, Daria Saltykova. Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova, also known as the Saltykchika, was a Russian noblewoman who gained infamy for her cruel treatment and deaths of serfs during the 18th century. She became a widow at the age of 25, and after her husband's death in 1755, Saltykova inherited significant wealth and several estates. Saltykova was known for her extreme cruelty and sadistic treatment of her serfs who worked for her on her estates. She then subjected them to physical and psychological harm, including torment and death. Rumors about Saltykova's harmful behavior circulated and complaints were made to authorities. In 1768, Daria Saltykova was arrested and brought to trial. The investigation revealed horrifying details of her crime, including instances of beating, mutilations, and killing of serfs. In 1768, she was sentenced to life imprisonment and perpetual penitence in a convent. Daria Salova died in 1801 while still in confinement, and her life and crimes became the subject of legends and stories, illustrating the extreme harm that some members of the Russian nobility inflicted on their serfs. In total, she ended up killing up to 140 people. Number 3, Leonardo Cianciolulli. My bad if I messed that up. Also known as the soap maker of Correggio, Leonardo was an Italian serial killer who gained infamy for her gruesome crimes in the 1930s. Leonardo's crime was motivated by a twisted belief in human sacrifice as a means of protecting her children and ensuring their well-being. She believed that her killings would result in turning her victims into soap and tea cakes, and Leonardo's first known killings occurred in 1939 when she killed Faustina Seti, a middle-aged woman whom she had promised to find a husband. She subsequently killed 2 other women, Francesca Salvi and Virginia Cacioppo, using similar methods, and in 1946, Leonardo went to trial for her crimes. She was then found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. Leonardo spent her sentence in various prisons and psychiatric institutions where then she died on October 15, 1970. Number 2, Yuana Barazza. Born in 1957 to an alcoholic mother, Yuana Barazza is a former Mexican professional wrestler and one of the most prolific serial killers in Mexican history. Between 1998 and 2006, Barazza, a remarkable, hefty, and muscular woman, killed between 42 and 48 elderly women. This earned her the nickname the Old Lady Killer, and it was long thought that the killer was a male. And it wasn't until January 2006 when Barazza was arrested, fleeing from the home of one of her latest victims. She was found guilty on 16 charges of these crimes and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Considering all of her victims were older women, there is a chance it was due to childhood trauma from her alcoholic mother. She felt the need to take justice into her own hands and kill as many quote-unquote versions of her mother she could find. But of course, this is all speculation, and even if that was the case, whatever her experience was with her mother was a clear indication of her subconscious motive. And finally, number 1, Andita Marti. This Spanish woman is often referred to as a vampire owing to the nature of her crimes. It is generally believed that Marti kidnapped young people off the streets of Barcelona and put them to work in her brothel. It is also believed that Marti killed minors and used their blood and remains in various elixirs, and then she sold these elixirs to the rich, claiming that they would treat dangerous ailments like tuberculosis. 12 victims have been linked to Marti, although it's suspected that she killed many more. However, some historians defend Marti and argue that her crimes weren't as bad or as many as the traditional story suggests. Either way, people had died. Number 10, Pearl Hart. Pearl Hart was a notorious figure in the American Wild West, known for involvement in a stagecoach robbery. Her life story is often intertwined with the tales of the Old West and the outlaws who sought adventure and fortune during that era. Pearl Hart, whose real name was Pearl Taylor, was born in Canada in 1871, but was later moved to the United States and became involved in various activities, including acting and singing. In 1899, Pearl Hart and a companion, Joe Boot, decided to rob a stagecoach in Arizona. The stagecoach was en route from the Globe to Florence, carrying passengers and valuables. The stagecoach robbery did not go as planned, as Pearl Hart and Joe Boot were not experienced criminals, and their attempt was somewhat amateurish. They failed to obtain a significant amount of loot, and after the failed robbery, Pearl and Joe was captured by law enforcement. They were then later arrested and brought to trial, and Pearl Hart and Joe Boot were tried for their crimes. During the trial, Pearl presented herself as a victim of circumstances, arguing that she had committed the robbery due to personal circumstances. She was convicted and sentenced to only 5 years in prison. As for Joe, nobody knows. Pearl Hart's life after her release from prison remains somewhat of a mystery. After serving about 2 years of her sentence, she was released due to good behavior, and Pearl Hart's belief was dramatic stint as a stagecoach robber contributed to her lasting notoriety as the annals of Wild West history. Her story became a part of a lore surrounding outlaws and characteristics of American frontier. Number 9. Laura Bullion was also known as the Rose of the Wild Bunch. She was a female outlaw associated with the Wild Bunch Gang, a notorious group of American outlaws led by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid during the late 19th and early 20th century. Laura Bullion was born in Knickerbocker, Texas in 1876. Her family moved to the mining town of Moab, Utah, where she grew up. Laura became acquainted with the members of the Wild Bunch, including Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and then other notorious outlaws. She developed a romantic relationship with Kid Curry, a member of the gang, and Laura Bullion participated in various criminal activities with the Wild Bunch, including train and bank robberies. She was also known for her sharpshooting skills and her involvement in the gang's illegal enterprises. In 1901, Laura was arrested in St. Louis, Missouri for her involvement in a train robbery. robbery. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison but only served about 3, and after her release from prison, Laura Bullion tried to lead a more law-abiding life. She lived under an assumed name in Memphis, Tennessee, working as a housekeeper. Laura Bullion then passed away on December 2nd, 1961 in Memphis, Tennessee, at the age of 85, and her death was largely unnoticed by the public. Number 8, there is a limited historical information about Belle Cid, who is also known as Madame Vestal. She was a figure associated with the American Old West during the late 19th century, particularly in the realms of entertainment and the infamous red light districts of frontier towns. Belle Cid was reportedly an entertainer and an actress who performed in various theatrical productions and shows during the late 1800s. But later in her life, Belle Cid adopted the alias Madame Vestals and became known for her role as Madame, managing establishments and red light districts. These areas were known for housing brothels and establishments that provided various forms of entertainment. During the late 19th century, the American West would experience rapid growth with numerous people seeking fortune and adventures in newly settled areas, as well as red light districts. The presence of the red light districts, saloons, and entertainment venues catered to the needs of this transient population that was very common. Like many individuals associated with the red light districts of the Old West, the details of Belle Cid's life remain somewhat elusive and separating the fact that a legend can be challenging. Nevertheless, figures like Madame Vestals contribute to the colorful and diverse tapestry of the Old West societal history. Number 7, Rose Dunn, also known as the Rose of the Cameron, was a legendary figure associated with the American Old West. Born in 1878, Rose Dunn gained notoriety for her romantic entanglements with outlaws and her involvement in the activities of the Wild Bunch Gang. Rose Dunn was also born in Indian Territory, which later became Oklahoma, in 1878. She came from a large family, and her brothers were also known for their involvement in outlaw activities. Rose Dunn then became romantically involved with George Bitter Creek Newcomb, a member of the Wild Bunch Gang led by Bill Doolin. The Wild Bunch was notorious for its involvement in train and bank robberies, as we know. In 1895, a shootout occurred in the Dunn family ranch involving lawmen seeking to capture Dunn brothers and their associates. During the confrontation, Rose's brother John Dunn was killed, and her older brother George Dunn was captured after the death of Bitter Creek Newcomb. Rose Dunn then lived more of a settled life, and she married Charles Albert Noble, a farmer, and they had a family. Rose and Charles lived in Cathridge, Missouri. Rose Dunn then passed away on February 5, 1955 in Parachute, Colorado. Number 6, Sarah Jane Newman was born in Tennessee in 1817 and later moved to Texas. Also known as Sally Skull, was a figure associated with the Texas frontier during the mid-19th century. Her life story involves elements of violence, crime, and romance, contributing to her notoriety in the history of the American West. Sarah married George Washington Skull, a Texan and a participant in the Texan War of Independence. George Skull operated a ferry and owned a ranch in a location known as Skull Crossing in the San Antonio River. The crossing was an important point for travelers and cattle drives, as the Skull family became involved in violent feuds with the Taylor family over land and cattle. This feud escalated and resulted in several killings on both sides, with also casualties in 1867. During the height of the feud, Sally Skull was widowed after her husband George Skull was killed. Following his death, she sought out revenge and killed several members of the Taylor family. And after the killings, Sally Skull was captured and imprisoned. She was definitely tried for the deaths, but was charged or dropped due to insufficient evidence. And after her release, Sally Skull's life became less eventful as she lived in relatively obscurity and passed away in 1888. Number 5, Giulia Tofana. Not your typical Chanel number 5, but this too was a femme fatale bottle used by so many women to do one major thing: to get rid of their husbands. By some definitions, Giulia was a girl's girl. After all, it was the 1600s, and women who had malignant husbands who would physically harm and control them was a rather common issue, and the general rule was that unless your spouse passed away, that was the only time a woman could be granted her freedom. In its creation was associated by none other than Giulia Tofana, who apparently was the ringleader of 6 poisoners in Rome. In order to avoid detection from authorities, they actually used the trade name after St. Nicholas and would sell the poison openly as a cosmetic. They even went ahead and used an image of St. Nicholas over the vials, and St. Nicholas and the vial of poison would be sold, affecting over 600 victims, mostly husbands. The active contents inside the vial was unknown, but it was filled with arsenic, lead, and possibly belladonna. It was colorless, tasteless, and therefore very easy to mix with other substances like wine or water. The poisoning would go unnoticed, and its symptoms would mimic other illnesses that was prominent at the time. First dosage would mimic a cold, the third would be digestive issues, and the fourth was death. It was so effective and helpful that when the poison was used to be in its slow active state, it would give the victims time to assume that they were dying and write a will. And if the provider of the poison changed their mind, an antidote was simply lemon juice and vinegar. Fun fact, Mozart at one point was poisoned using aqua tofana, but apparently he himself started this rumor. And if you knew anything about Mozart, he was the Bugs Bunny level type of troll. Number 4, Bonnie Nettles. As cult leaders go, most women of cult leaders were subject to follow their male counterparts. As for Bonnie Nettles, she was the co-founder and co-leader with Marshall Applewhite of the Heaven's Gate New Religious Movement. Although she was registered as a nurse and was married to a businessman named Joseph Nettles, she actually lived a relatively normal life. However, according to the New York Times, she began attempting to contact deceased spirits by conducting regular seances and came to believe that the 19th century monk named Brother Francis frequently spoke with her and gave her instructions. She also visited multiple fortune tellers who told her that she would soon meet a mysterious man who was tall with with light hair and fair complexion, descriptions that were very close to Marshall Applewhite's appearance. It was unclear how they met, but after Nettles did an astrological reading for Applewhite, they had an instant spiritual connection. Nettles and Applewhite established Heaven's Gate together as equals, with Nettles running the group and Applewhite speaking for her. Nettles claimed to have communicated with aliens about the next level and told Applewhite to tell their followers. When Nettles died from cancer, the mass followers of Heaven's Gates would then follow through by culminating to take their own lives in 1997. Number 3, Eileen Woos. On a bit recent note, you may or may not have heard in this case in the news, but Eileen Woos was a convicted serial killer as she targeted only men as an adult worker. She had up to 7 victims and would target specifically motorists, men who she would meet as a hitchhiker. Her story begins when her mother at the age of 14 married her father at the age of 19. After 2 months of having Eileen, her parents divorced and left her with her alcoholic grandparents who were also malicious in their care. Eileen would then do adult work as a minor once her grandfather kicked her out to live in the woods at the age of 15, and she tried to take her own life multiple times, all failed attempts, and until she met the love of her life, Tyra Moore, in the late 80s is when she would continue a string of crime. While she was incarcerated at the Florida Department of Corrections BCI death row for women, she tried to appeal to the US Supreme Court, which was later denied, and at that point she dismissed her legal counsel and terminated all pending appeals. She would then go off and say, "I killed those men, I robbed them cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I'm so sick of this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." After extreme mistreatments she suffered while imprisoned and the inhumane management given to her by her officers, in her final interview she turned to the interviewer and said, and also paraphrasing due to censorship, "You sabotaged me, society, and the cops and the system. An attacked woman got executed and was used for books and movies and so on." Her final on-camera words were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." She was later executed by lethal injection. Number 2, Pearl Fernandez. Again, although this case is one of a very recent event, it still marks as a notable case in the issues that lie in the legal forms, in the protections of minors, and the lack of involvement of CPS. Pearl Fernandez, you may or may not know, was the mother of Gabriel Fernandez, who passed away in Pearl and her boyfriend Usaro's custody. According to The Atlantic, Pearl Fernandez and her boyfriend shot Gabriel with a BB gun, tortured him with pepper spray, beat him with a baseball bat, and forced him to eat cat feces. All injuries pointed to severe psychological and emotional distress endured over a long period of time. It was not one-time event that led to Gabriel's death, it was months of torture. A judge rejected her remorse, stating that Pearl's actions were horrendous and inhumane and nothing short of evil. At her trial, jurors heard how Gabriel was tortured and abused by his mother and her boyfriend after being placed in their care 8 months before his death. Pearl is now serving time at the Central California Women's Facility after being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Number 1, Jolly Jane. While she definitely was jolly when she committed these crimes, Jane Toppin, nicknamed Jolly Jane, was an American serial killer who was known to have committed 12 murders in Massachusetts between 1895 and 1901. How did she commit these? Well, she was a nurse, and her objective was oddly enough to target patients and their family members. Doctors who hired her thought of her as one of their best nurses, but today psychiatrists say that she was one of the most unusual serial killers in history. She was born and raised in the Boston Female Asylum, where unwanted female children were often abandoned. There she was adopted by Ann Toppin, where she was under foster care until she was 18. At this point, she then pursued nursing at Cambridge Hospital in Boston. It was here where she stated her interest in the patients was ought to be taken care of. She grew emotional attachments to them, and if she really liked them, she would fake their medical documents to force them to stay longer at the hospital. She would then also dose her elderly patients with opium to see how they react with the drugs, and then upping the dosage each time. She would also watch them slowly succumb to their death, and she would also mix different types of poisons with her patients and other drugs to stage a sickness and nurse them back to health. Very similar to the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case, where her mother Dee Dee had a mental illness known as Munch-Austin syndrome by proxy. This mental health condition is basically where a caregiver makes up or causes an illness or injury in a person under their care, such as the young or the elderly adult, or a person who has a disability. Because vulnerable people are the victims, MSBP is a form of multiple harm cases. Jolly Jane also had a masochistic side, as she would even get into the bed of her patients who were suffering until they died. She wasn't caught until she used a metallic-based poison on a victim, which finally sparked an investigation. In a court 1902, Toppin was found guilty, and then she told her attorney that she actually killed more than 100 people and even got in beds with more of her victims. She was sentenced to stay at an asylum, stayed there until her death.